is some good news for veterans nationally. Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, and John McCain, of all people, have actually teamed up to pass a bill through the Senate to allow veterans access to actual private doctors if they are living over 40 miles away from a VA hospital or have waited longer than a month for treatment. Now, it also allows those who do their job badly to be fired immediately, as well as having an expedited appeals process. Now, this bill was bipartisan and managed to sail through the Senate with nearly all Democratic and Republican support. So truly bipartisan. 3 senators voted against it, all Republicans. Jeff Sessions, who I mentioned earlier, Bob Corker, and Ron Johnson. Now, once again, we're going to beat up on Sessions a little bit here. Sessions made a point of order against an emergency designation provision that would keep the legislation from being limited by budget restrictions. You see, apparently Congress is not allowed to create legislation that would add to the deficit without offsetting it from somewhere else. Now, the emergency designation actually allows Congress to bypass that rule so they can pass it without having to fund, to basically slash something else. Now, on that point of order, John McCain had said, quote, "If it's not an emergency that we have neglected the men and women who have worked to keep us free, then I don't know what it is. It breaks our hearts, it breaks Americans' hearts when they hear these stories of how we've treated these men and women." Now, the Sanders-McCain bill did pass, and it will be on the president's desk soon. So I want to know, I want to ask you guys, if is this enough, or does more still need to be done while the VA continues to get its act together? But before I do that, I just want to talk a little bit about McCain here. I have this tendency to want to beat up McCain as well, because once again, I have to point out that he's one of the people that is most sending people off to war, but at least he's saying, hey, I may be a war hawk and I may be always pushing for war and wanting to send people off to war, but you gotta give him a little bit of credit to where he actually plays lip service, and not just lip service, but tries to take care of the veterans once they get back. So a little bit of credit and then a little bit of kidney punching. All in one segment. I'm on a roll tonight. All right, so what do you think? Is this enough? And we're going to start with you, Jordan.
Obviously it's not enough, and I know that you didn't mean it in that way. Is it enough of a start? Absolutely. Like, this is a great start. I mean, it sucks that the problem, it was an issue in the first place, but this is an example of Congress doing what it's supposed to do. And it can't go without saying that one reason why Congress is working is because this is something that was headed up by an actual, ideologically pure member of the government, namely Bernie Sanders, somebody who is less loyal to the Democratic Party, and in fact, may or may not even be considered a Democrat, depending on who you're asking. And so he stood up and said, let's do the right thing, and obviously John McCain has a vested interest in this as well, that it doesn't always seem like he lives up to me, but I'm sure he knows, more about what being a veteran means than I do. But yeah, it's a good start, and as long as that's what it is, as long as it's a start, but also as long as it's, or I should say, as long as this is a start and not the whole game, but also in one area, as long as it's not a start, and that is what I kind of alluded to in my previous rant. There's an aspect of privatization of the VA here, and while I think that this particular example of what they're doing is a good mix of public and private working together, if you live too far from the VA, or if you the VA, the waiting list is too long to give you a place to go, that seems reasonable to me. So as long as that's not money that that doesn't start a trend of pulling money out of the VA to put into the private sector, then I'm all for it. The private sector is stepping up where there's not a single payer system is a completely different thing, and that's I think us as at least the two Americans on the panel, we're not anti-private healthcare. We're anti-bad healthcare, and whenever you've got a system working against a more effective system like we have, that's what you get. But where a private system can actually help a public system, by all means, let the private system do its thing. So yeah, it's a good step in the right direction. We can't stop here, but I'm glad something got done. I hate that it took something so tragic to get it going, but at least it's happening.
All right, Stephen.
Yeah, I pretty much just kind of reciprocate what Jordan said. It is a start, and it's nice when you've got John McCain and Bernie Sanders, who couldn't really be more ideologically opposed when it comes to starting needless wars, saying, well, okay, we've started these wars, but let's at least look after the troops. And as John pointed out, there's a lot of common sense there. I mean, okay, I'm English and I value the NHS a hell of a lot and kind of public healthcare, but I'm in favour of having some private. If you want to top up on private, then that's fine. And, parts of this bill where they say that if you're kind of quite a large distance away from a VA clinic, then of course you can go to a private one. I mean, that's absolutely common sense in, a country that's as geographically vast as America. I think it's good news, but as to whether it's enough, I think it's just a starting point. I don't want any Republicans or Democrats for that matter, or just the normal public to think, oh, we've passed this bill, therefore kind of veterans, healthcare, oh, that's all done now, we can move on to the next thing. No, it's something that you've got to constantly keep looking at. I imagine that there's going to be, because it's passed the House and it's passed the Senate, but they need to still work out some kind of iron out some differences between the House version and the Senate version. So there'll be some changes. And I wouldn't be surprised if they maybe slip something in. There's probably one or two issues with it that will need to be fixed a bit further down the line. But at least they're doing something. And this is a good bill. It's a bipartisan bill, and I'm all for it.
Right. It's not exactly time to hang up the mission accomplished banner. So I'll definitely agree with that. So let's go to Dan. Dan, what do you think?
Well, we almost had two straight topics where we all agreed, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to burst the bubble on that. I do not think this is a good thing. I do think this is the road to privatization. I understand where you're now in a situation in America where these things are almost temporary band-aids that you don't have any other choice to go to. But this is the beginning of privatizing the healthcare for the troops, and this is another failure of the left because we have wishy-washy leaders in progressive politics that won't say, hey, the government is supposed to do certain things. It's not, this idea of big government isn't going to other countries and planting our flag, but big government is taking care of people once they come home from planting the flag, is this great, double standard that I wish somebody could more, accurately explain to me, because this is exactly where the government should be paying for things. The government is supposed to take care of its people, and this is where obviously the Canadian versus American healthcare situation is obviously front and center, where I don't enjoy private options. The government getting off the hook to privatization does not lead to better healthcare services. This is something that should be, if somebody lives far away, we used to send people to them. We used to do things for people, and now it's like, oh, well, it makes sense as if they go to this clinic outside and it's private, everything will be fine. Well, yes, that's today, but in 2 years down the road, what's that person doing? And so, no, I don't think this is great. I understand where it's, if somebody's who needs care right now is like, anything right now, please. So unfortunately, that's where we're at. But yes, when you have these people who have no problem sending everybody off to war in every which direction, and then also don't agree that the government can skimp and save when they get home, I do think that's a contradiction in terms, and I do think the government should be slapped around for trying to have it both ways.
Yeah, you bring up some really good points. I still say that it's something, right? And something at this point is better than nothing.
But that's how
what you're saying.
But that's how the left keeps losing the game. Well, it's better than, yes, because no one will stand up and say the government needs to spend more money on this exact thing, which is taking care of veterans when they get home. And that's what you can't get the other side to do. So we can applaud John McCain, but John McCain's side would never say, let's spend a ton more money on making sure these guys get the care they need. No, it's let's do the two-tier thing, and it won't.
No, I think you're right. Like I actually, and like I do agree with you. I think you're right about that, definitely. But at the same time, this is a situation where you're bleeding, right? You need a Band-Aid. Like, you need something, and a Band-Aid is better than nothing right now. And I hate saying that, and I absolutely agree with you that this is how we lose, and this is how the Republicans and the conservatives win.
And that's how you got a wishy-washy Obamacare.
Yeah, but at the same time, God, you got to have something. I know. Jordan, I know you really want to jump in, man. So please do.
So Dan's right, like his heart's in the right place. I totally get what Dan's saying. And generally speaking, Dan's right. I completely agree with him. However, we're not talking about like the overarching picture. We're talking about this specific issue. And on this specific issue, as long as it is a start in the things that it's right in, and it's not a start but a finish on that one particular privatization part, this is an excellent beginning. And now what I want to get into is that the problem with the VA, at least systematically, is not funding. And I'm going to get pushback from the left on that. The VA is fairly well funded. Now there are certain clinics you can point to that funding is the issue, but that's not the problem with the system as a whole. And this bill does address the culture even, because it got rid of the performance bonuses. Which should kind of be, if you're anti-privatization, that's a very kind of, private market approach, the idea that you're going to pay a public employee more based on performance rather than public service, or rather than a general public service contract, I should say. Like, it did away with that. But what I want to point to here, and I tried to do my research and find this interview. I could not find it. I'm so sorry, but NPR did an interview whenever this story was first breaking with one of the guys who worked for the VA and blew the whistle on this in the early days. And just like other, pseudo-military related whistleblowers we've seen, whether Chelsea Manning, who is, straight up military whistleblower, Edward Snowden with NSA, the same thing happened in the VA. There's this culture of, like, whenever he tried to go through the proper channels and say, and he was the manager of, I believe, a psychiatric department was what his position was. He went from the private sector to the public sector, and he realized that the people working under him were only seeing about 4 patients a day. And these are 30-minute sessions. And then, maybe you want to be generous and say 30 minutes for your paperwork after each session. That means these people were working 4 hours a day, and somehow patients were still being seen in time to get those performance bonuses, and it was just obvious it wasn't going on. But it wasn't an issue of lack of funding. It was an issue of a culture of a lack of accountability that, one, could not have happened in the private sector. If that would have happened in the private sector, that would have come to light, and people would have got busted. But because it's in the public sector, it can. And, hey, I have to be really careful what I say here. It's not the VA, but I know someone very close to me who works for a state hospital who is a manager and has to deal with some terrible, terrible, horrible employees that couldn't hold a job down anywhere else. And she can't do anything about it because they're state employees. And there's no recourse of action there. That idea that there is a problem with bureaucracy, that's real. Now, that doesn't mean you then make the jump to these conservative talking points that there's no way a single payer or state-funded option can work. It's just a point to say that the problem is not always funding, and that when it comes to government institutions, you have to be really diligent to keep efficiency in place to make sure that that bureaucracy doesn't become too strong. And I believe you can do that. We as liberals, that's our central kind of thesis of government. That government has problems. The answer is to fix those problems, not throw out government. And so to tie all that back around, I know I said all that to say this. That's why Dan is wrong. And in this particular instance, this is a good thing. because our veterans were dying now. They were not getting health care now. Something had to be changed now, and that's what they did. The idea that we're being wishy-washy liberals by not saying let's fix the system. Well, it's going to take a long time to fix the system. And so that's whenever Jeff says, well, you got to have something, even if it's not perfect. That's what we mean. It's not like Obamacare. That was kind of a false equivalency that Dan drew there, because Obamacare was establishing a system going forward. That was a semi-permanent or permanent thing. This is something that was meant to meet an issue or address a need in the now. And in that regard, it is a good start. Now, like I say, if we head down this path towards privatization, Dan's absolutely right. It's wrong. And Dan's absolutely right. Liberals need to stand up and say, listen, we privatized in the short term as a stopgap, or maybe even not in the short term, but just, for people who live too far away from the VA or whatever. It's still a single-payer funded system. It's just run by the private sector. We've got some success with other examples of that in America, as long as that doesn't, become the norm, because then it's just a sellout to the insurance industry. But anyway, at the end of the day, this is a start, and as long as it's a start in the right place and not a start towards the other place, it's a good thing.
So let me expand on that just a little bit, and then we'll go to Dan to close us out. I just want to expand by saying, accountability is definitely something that needs to be done, not just at government, but I think we as liberals, we need to hold our politicians and other liberals accountable as well for not pushing back against things that are the stopgap measures that no longer get pushed forward, right? Dan was right in the way that we accept these wishy-washy stopgap measures, and then we're just like, oh, well, it works. Why not? We'll stick with it, right? Well, you stick with what works. Well, yeah, but there are things that will work infinitely better if we continue to push on it. And that's where we're getting into the wishy-washy liberal thing, is that we stop. We don't actually continue to push further left on some of these issues, like on Obamacare. I'm pretty sure that Obama's like, mission accomplished. We're done. What are you talking about? Hang the banner. I got Obamacare passed. But it's not at all done, because there are still so many problems with that specific thing. And it would be just like the problems with this specific stopgap measure. Like, the VA needs to be fixed. This is a good Band-Aid, as good as Band-Aids can get, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem of the VA itself. And that's what needs to be focused on, so that we can get it back to VA and remove this Band-Aid. Because what's underneath needs to heal first. All right. So, Dan, take us home.
The last few topics on this show tonight, I've mentioned the idea of progressives doing a really bad job at making their case for government. And Jordan, your thesis statement is why I think they've done a terrible job. Because your thesis statement is essentially, when you're talking about the VA, you said the idea that government has terrible bureaucracy issues that the private sector wouldn't have, and that if they were in the private sector, this would be cleared up. I have no idea why you feel that way.
Not what I said. That's
okay,
not
well,
what I said.
All right, well, go back to what you're saying. I'll let you make your point, because what I heard was, in the situations that you were giving, you were saying in a government situation, we don't have the ability to stop that. It'll happen in government no matter what, kind of shrug. But if this was private, those people will be fired.
No, what I pointed to was a specific example of doctors not seeing patients, which would not happen in the private system, because hospitals bill by the service. So the idea is to cram as many patients in as you can, and that's one reason why we have bad private health care in America, because there's a lack of actual service. But these doctors, because the VA doesn't bill that way, were able to see 4 patients a day and then falsify the list and make it look like they were getting their work done. And also, to your other point, what I did say is that government does inherently have these big bureaucracies, but that does not mean we have to settle for them, which is the conservative point. Government has problems with bureaucracy, therefore government does not work. Liberals say, no, government has a problem with bureaucracy, so let's work to fix it. That was my point. Not that
Okay.
government cannot work. My point was that we need the VA and we need to reform it, but you can't do that overnight. What you can do overnight is pass the bill that was passed overnight here.
So then we would agree that a public VA, a government-funded VA, is a much better alternative.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
That's why I've explicitly said several times, if this is a path towards privatizing the VA, then it's completely headed the wrong direction.
I personally don't see how it's not, but we'll leave that aside for right now. But I guess the major point that I really wanted to drive home is the idea that these are these things, like government has the money. A lot of times I hear on these cable shows or around the table on these kind of discussions that, well, how are they going to fix the problem right now? Government can do that. If a hurricane hits the eastern seaboard tomorrow, there's money, right? Like this is, and if you don't say that, troops coming home, the VA veterans, especially when how much money you made on these wars, aren't a priority, then I do believe that we're letting the right sort of take over the conversation about what government can do and what it can't do. If we just immediately think, well, you've got to do some sort of two-tier situation because how else would it ever get done? That's where we lack leadership so badly in progressive politics. This, of course, could get done. Like the things that progressive politics have done in the past in different wars, this is such a small pittance of what we've done in the past. So anyways, that's the bottom line. Is I really think it's a failure of leadership to say, no, this is our responsibility as a society to take care of these guys and women.